All right, we're live. Hello, I'm Sean from RPH Ally. We have one of our earliest adopters at RPH Ally, Mary Sheehan, another pharmacist, and we have Dr. Andrea Leschak from our patient advocacy channel that she hosts in RPH Ally. So, why we're meeting today is because we are talking about having or connecting with your patients, with ourselves, right? And what happened was, I'm going to admit it, a few weeks ago, I had an email campaign that I kind of muffed the patients versus patients. And Mary called me out on it. And then Kevin also called me on it, but he thought I was doing a play on words, which I wasn't. But anyways.
I did too. I did too. I'm like, oh, how innovative. Like we should connect with our patients, PANTIENCE, like our ability to be patient and kind with our, like, oh yes, we do need to do that. And I'm like, oh, I wonder if he meant to do that. And so then I shot you an email and we talked about like how, just things happen for a reason. And like you say, you screwed up, but maybe it really wasn't a screw up at all.
Maybe it wasn't. And that was actually, we were talking about Andrea's conversation she had with Dr. Bruce about motivational interviewing. So it's all connected anyway. So, but Mary, you wanted to talk about this, so I'm gonna give you the floor first as far as connecting with your patients and kind of what does that mean?
Yeah, I did, because when I read it, I'm like, wow, it really reminded me of my years that I spent, behind the counter in a busy retail environment, and how I noticed that I don't have a lot of patience. And I thought, wow, this could really make this job hard for me, and I could continue to get frustrated with my own, what I was catching myself being very like thinking, wanting the patients to hurry up and speak faster and getting things done faster. And I realized that it's a great opportunity that I can work on that with myself. And then I remembered how I thought at that time, like I can be patient with myself as I'm learning patience. And so it was like self growth, which is like my favorite thing of all. Like I feel like work is such a wonderful opportunity to work on yourself, because especially, like Andrew, you can speak to this too. Like we're in front of people, and sometimes there are our mirrors and our teachers and just so many opportunities. And that was just such a hard one for me, Sean, being patient, because I think quickly and I move quickly, and that can be a real detriment.
That's awesome. And I like how you just said mirrors can be our teachers. I've never really thought about that before. But that's one thing we probably don't do enough is self-reflect and kind of dive deeper into ourselves. And I see Eric on the sport channel, Tammy Eric on the sport, Tammy on the burnout channels, and it's a lot of self-reflection, right? So very important.
Yeah.
I was just going to piggyback in on that, Mary. They often say that the things that bother you about other people are the traits that actually you're concerned about yourself.
Who says that?
And so when you were talking, I mean, I had a decade in community. So I had a decade at Walgreens. And in the beginning, I was that pharmacist that my dad was a pharmacist, my aunt and uncle were pharmacists. We were talking about that before we went live. My dad's a Duquesne alum. And, I was brought up in pharmacies since I was a toddler. And I wanted to be that pharmacist that my dad was. He had people back in the 70s that would drive an hour in like this rural area of Tennessee to come and see him. Wow. And I thought that was what it was going to be in 93 when I graduated. And in the beginning, I knew my people. I can say for the first 2, 3, 4 years, I was right there. They'd bring us pie or something like that because it was the South. But I tell you, by the time I left, year 8, 9, 10, somebody would walk up and I would just cringe because I was like, oh my gosh, I got to look away from the screen and make eye contact. And I look at that now 30 years later, and I think what a travesty that it was that I didn't pull myself out sooner. Because the way I look at it now, particularly that I'm in patient advocacy, and I want that person on the other side of the counter to be heard, seen, and valued, and I want that, I would fight for that eye contact. And now I look at it and I think, I signed up to be a pharmacist. I signed up to put myself in that space. And the point when I crossed over into, like you said, filling in the gaps, assuming I knew what was going on, answering the question before somebody had even given me the background.
Yeah.
That was an incredible disservice to my patients with a T. And also it wore away my health, my confidence, of what the career I'd picked. And so I think it's huge.
Oh, that's so interesting. So you see that connection, like because you weren't able to be patient with the C or have patience, that
Right.
it wore away your confidence, you said?
Absolutely. In my career choice, because what ended up happening before I left is, I want to say it was about 2-3 years before I left community. My mom was diagnosed with inflammatory breast cancer, given 6 weeks to live. And I mean, I had already got to the point where I was like, okay, keep your head down, gut it out, live to be 42, retire. I was FIRE before anybody even knew what the term was, the financial independence, retire early. And when she got sick, she was like 58, and I'm 54 now. And she was 58 and healthy as an ox. And I was like, oh shit, I could die tomorrow. And what a crappy life. And so it really made me question everything I was doing. So, I actually went and started working part-time at a scuba shop for like $7.50 an hour, cleaning pool decks, turning down pharmacist shifts. It got bad because I was like, wow, did I really, here I am, I've got, all this time I spent to get this degree. And, I go in and I'm just like in tears. This is just not sustainable. Thankfully, and Sean, you've talked about the burnout channel. I realized at that point, yeah, something had to change. I started turning that aircraft carrier. I thought I was going to be a scuba instructor, live in Florida. I already had the keys picked out. I was going to part-time at 2 different chains. I was going to keep my medical insurance, and I was going to be a dive instructor. I had it all mapped out, to leave the profession. So it eroded a lot of everything that I thought, 30 something years directed towards. Thankfully, I found my step, a new place in pharmacy, a way to kind of rekindle that romance with it. And then, I spent about another 20 years still in it, doing very different types of roles.
Did not know that, Andrea. I didn't know. I did not know that you had taken scuba diving shifts. Wow.
Oh yeah, yeah. I completely. I can still remember my supervisor calling me up and going, "Why do you not want to come to work?" And he's like, "Where?" Because like they knew I was stepping down. It was rough, and I was like, "Look, I can't do this anymore. I would rather clean the pool deck for $7.50 an hour than walk into a pharmacy."
I remember like approaching, that point. For me, it was a little bit more recent. And again, I was really glad that I had worked on being more patient and having patience with the C. And I thought I need to apply this to myself. And I need to be very patient with my own process and know when enough is enough and when I can leave. And there's other things that go into that. I think patience and kindness hang out together too. Like I need to be kind to myself while I'm really struggling, not knowing how much longer I could do what I'm doing, and not having the answers, like not knowing what's next. Like you kind of had a fallback. You're like, well, I'll do this scuba thing and I'll do that. I had no plan.
Right.
The only thing, looking back now that we're having this conversation, the only thing I could fall back on was the skills that I had, ironically, developed only because I worked with the public for so long, like kindness and patience. And I remember just very calmly, naturally, like any other day, walking up the steps, coming home, and I'm like, oh, this is it. This is the day I resign. And then I realized it. But I had to be very, very patient and kind with myself to get to that point.
When did that happen, Mary? When did you?
It was 2021. Right. It was 2021 and it was October, one day in October. And I'm like, yeah, wow, this is it. And then I put in my 2 weeks and the beginning, and I didn't even have a job.
That is really interesting. And I think that's dare I say, it's well, we graduated about the same time. I'm a 93
Yeah.
grad.
Yeah.
And so when I sit there and I look at like coping skills and what we talked about societally about burnout,
Mhm.
that did not exist. I mean,
Right.
I mean, my parents, you were supposed to get a job and gut it out till you retired or died. I
And I
mean, that
don't
was,
think they use the phrase "gut it out."
well,
I
that
think
was,
right. I think this goes hand in hand with burnout, right? Like, just be stronger, just be faster, just be more resilient, be more this, be more that. Like I would hear that
yeah,
from my bosses and my peers, where you just have to be more, do more. And I'm like, wow, that is really something to think about. Okay, be more, do more. I'm thinking that's not going to solve it now. This is not going to be the answer for me this time. It's going to be a slower approach. It's going to be not be more, do more. It's going to be like allow more, listen more to myself, be more patient and kind with myself, and find the answers within. And it's hard because I still feel like there's a lot of judgment for not being able to hack it. And it's just, yeah. I mean, I don't know what the answer is. I think it's very individual with the burnout, but I don't think the problem is going to be solved, I guess, in much the same way it was created, which is keep going until
right.
you can't. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I noticed is so like I said, when I left, I'm trying to remember 2002, 2003, somewhere around then, I ended up meeting my husband, who was an actual scuba instructor who was in the military. And so, dare I say, I ended up leaving Walgreens to go live overseas for a few years. And when I was working for the military, that's when I started seeing that collaboration piece. And so when I came back, I went into consulting and then faculty. But to your point, each role, the time that I stayed in it was shorter because I was much more aware of my ability to tolerate. How many days am I feeling that stress? Am I feeling that do
Yeah.
more? Am I feeling like I'm losing who I am to this?
Yes.
Not work-life balance, but at what point does the scale not balanced correctly?
Yeah.
And I've jokingly said last year I did a seminar, a couple of workshops on burnout. I said my career started looking like a doomsday clock. The first company was 10 years, then 7, then 4. And then I waited 6 months working in pharma before I had to have a conversation about misaligned values and being part of the solution and not the problem. I was like,
Oh my Lord. Yeah.
but that was over 30 years.
Hmm.
I mean, it took that long for me to go, wait a second. And while I was doing it, getting back to like patient with a T advocacy, that's when I had realized that, I've been calling myself an advocate for
Forever.
assaulting. And so what if I flip it and I become
Yeah.
an advocate first, who, by the way, happens to have these skill sets?
Yeah.
How can I weave that into what I do? And oh, by the way, I have lived overseas. I'm a world traveler. I'm a diver, sailor. Problem solving, risk aversion, or not risk aversion, risk management, or reduction. Can all of that be built in to help people in a different way? So I'm not. It allows me to be all that I am, as opposed to myopically
And
just.
it's interesting because I think we're maybe hitting on something that I think could help people because the answer is within. And when I listen to your story, I feel like there was just different levels and layers where you really went within. And so again, back to Sean's email when he said we have to connect with our patients, meaning the other. We have to connect with the other. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if one more person tells me to do one more thing for the other, that's not going to solve it. I need to connect what I thought you were saying with my patients, with myself. And when I hear you, I hear a lot of like self-reflection and connecting back with yourself. And I think if there is something that can help another pharmacist who is still out there, it's that, isn't it, Andrea? It's like take some
Absolutely.
time to connect with yourself. What are your, and you mentioned values, right? That's a big one. To listen to yourself, to understand what are your values, what do you really want for yourself, and do that with kindness and patience. But to just go back to the one that wears the lab coat standing behind the counter who's really suffering. And it doesn't negate anyone else is suffering. That doesn't have to be a contest. You know, I don't have to say that I'm suffering more than my patients or my bosses or the, you know, whatever, big pharma. It doesn't negate it. But there really needs to be a place, I think. And that's what I see a lot. I see my peers suffering. I see my fellow lab coat wearers suffering. And that's, you know, what really bothers me.
Right. Right.
I feel sad for them because I was them.
Oh, I do too. And I'll, you know, and I'm not someone who thinks that every pharmacist needs to go hang a private shingle. I don't
Right.
think that retail is dead. Let's call it what it is.
Exactly. No, right.
You know,
right. And I know you don't, but because you've not said that, you've said you found your way yourself. There's only one way to find your way, and that's within yourself, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'm getting out of all this, which would be a great cure for burnout. It's not doing one more thing or being one more thing, or it's just yourself, like listening to yourself.
Exactly. No, I love it.
And I don't think that's necessarily easy. It wasn't easy for me. I'm glad that I had some time and didn't have another job, because it took me that long to, first of all, for my nervous system to calm down.
Yep.
That is a real thing, for my adrenal glands to settle, for my blood sugar to settle, to get my health back. And then the noise, because there's so much noise when you're always doing, to allow the quiet.
It's so funny you said that, because when I was living in Connecticut and I was getting to that hairy edge of going, yeah, I think another career change is coming. I talk about like turning the aircraft carrier, because I'm always like looking at the horizon, but you know, also where I am now. So being present yet looking ahead. And my husband walked in one day and I was in the house. The house is stone cold silent. And I was wearing hearing protection because I had been outside cutting grass. And I'd come in and I'd stopped cutting grass like 2 hours ago. And I was still wearing the hearing protection.
Interesting.
It was quiet. And I just was like, I want the noise to go away. And there's nobody in the house. We don't have pets or kids or anybody. And yet I was just like in that space where it's like, there is no anything, no music. And
I think that's what our peers need. They need some like real quiet, not the quiet that leads up to the next thing you got to do, but the real quiet that we can maybe give ourselves.
Right.
In whatever way that is, that whatever makes sense to, for me, it was leaving a job with no job. That made sense to me. I don't suggest anybody do what I did. That's just where it was fine. It worked out just fine for me. And I have no regrets.
Well, but I was going to say, I had no intention of leaving. In 2018, when I left the university, we moved. I had no idea. I was going to give myself 3 months, because other than like moving to a different country, I had almost always had a consecutive job since I graduated. You know, I just never stopped. 3 days after I resigned my position, my sister and I are sitting on a beach. My dad starts hallucinating, admits himself to an emergency department. We find out that he's diagnosed with a dementia. And by the time I got back to see my husband, because you know the chaos of the acute, I looked at him and I said, you know, he knows who I am now. I can't go back to work. You know, I can't do this now. And he was like, fine. And we'd already downsized once. So we went, I mean, over the course of about 3 years, we moved into 800 square foot, sold pretty much everything. Well, about 3/4 of everything we owned, you know, just went super tiny. Didn't suffer. I mean, I still have a boat, but we made everything compact so that I could have the freedom to be with my dad. Because I mean, I didn't have this idea that I was going to start entrepreneurship then. I was trying to find a lifeline to be able to, you know, spend time with him.
You were trying to find the lifeline, but I also hear in that you understood what your values were and you followed what your value was.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we lose track of what our values were. I know I did. Like, what's even important to me? Like, wow, I'm so far gone that I don't even know what's important to me and what I value. Like, I need to have time. And I think that's what you did. Like, you followed your value and that led to something really good. I think that's a great, like example for people if they could get in touch with what's important to them, maybe that will lead to the next thing. Because that's really interesting. That your dad was important to you and your family was important. You value that. And that's what led you to make other decisions, like when you lead with your values.
Yeah.
Sean, you talk about leading with your values. I think you did. You led with your values. And I guess that kind of goes along, right? Because like leading with your values, I'm not sure how it connects with patients, but I don't know, it feels somewhat related. But I know you've said that. You've talked about values and being quiet enough to know what they are. And
no, this was
tell me
this
about your
was
values, Sean. What do you
this
value?
was this was exactly how I envisioned this conversation going. I love this.
So good. We've manifested that for you.
My values. I mean, yeah, no, it's faith first, it's family second, and then do good after that, right? And that's where, I mean, Mary, when we first started talking, I wasn't working for a company that I enjoyed working for, or I thought aligned with my values, right? It took me a lot longer to leave than expected, but at least I got out. But yeah, I mean, it's when you talk about patients and burnout and all that stuff, it's like, I still have problems with those within myself, but at the same time, it's like, as as long as I'm going the right direction that I want to go, it's easier for me to like handle all that.
And you know what the right direction is because you follow your values, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're most likely more aware when something doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
It's almost like that spider tingly sense that, they talk about Spider-Man.
Right. Which you lose if you're always on the hamster wheel.
Exactly.
Like, where was my intuition? Where was my all of that stuff? Like, I didn't even know.
Right. Well, you're focused on the next whatever, right? You're
Just
either focused on trying to survive.
Yeah, and get through it and be better and be faster and be more and do more. It's very counterproductive. And I don't think human beings are supposed to live this way.
I also think it's seductive because there's this like other side of
how
we set our values in terms of measurement, like
metrics,
comparison, what other people think, And
oh my gosh.
I have nothing against having, 15 sets of initials after your name. If that's what jazzes you,
that's what turns on.
More power to you.
Yeah.
I remember when I got board certified, I mean, I did it for geriatrics. I won't say it was the right reason or wrong reason, but one of the reasons was I was faculty at a university and I only had one degree. I mean, I'm one of those PharmDs that went straight through. And so I don't have a BS or a master's or anything. And I had students with like more freaking initials after their name. And I can remember thinking, I've been working in geriatrics for years.
Oh my goodness. That is such a great example.
Do I need it to prove that I'm worthy?
Yes. And I think that's what's also hard on like the pharmacists that are like right around our age. It's not only do they get to feel less because they're not meeting their metrics and they're not doing enough and they're not fast enough. Now they don't have enough alphabets after their names. And it's a real like knock to back to the confidence thing, right? That's really rough. And all of this stuff, I don't think people are really, companies are really talking about.
Well, and that's why I love advocacy so much. I mean, there is a board certification for patient advocates. There is one, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. And yet I tell pharmacists all the time, if this is a transition that you want to make, I mean, technically you could hang a shingle tomorrow because you have the problem solving skills to do it. Now, I definitely think that there's value in walking with someone, like I can help someone like what that path looks like, building that foundation for a business, because there's a lot of ways to kind of hit potholes and speed bumps and things like that along the way. But the beautiful thing about it is there's no requirement, to start flipping that switch, with more certifications or more credentials.
Yeah.
And you just bring to the table, who you are and what energizes you. If it's a specific illness, if it's a specific problem you saw, if it's you were amazing with insurance or whatever, there's a place for you in it. And if you don't want to take that route and you just want to tap into that, well, how do we bring that back? How do we bring back the reason that most of us went to school to like Because I can remember my 18, 19-year-old self. My chemistry teacher wanted me to go into bench science and do, I think it was Chattanooga shale oil extraction or something. I mean, I could be wrong, not, but it was something, he was like, why don't you want to be a bench scientist? And I can remember standing there going, because I want to help people.
Yes. Oh my God. You're so right. I want to help people. And yeah. And that really is the crux of it. Right. And that's when you feel like you can't do that anymore for whatever reason, then it's you got to go. Cause that's what the heart of it is, isn't it? Is help people. And what I don't exactly remember your metaphor, but it reminds me of my metaphor. And I'm not, and like I haven't found my thing yet. Right. I look at it like I'm just keep circling that airport. I still haven't landed that plane. Like years later, I still don't know what I want to do, with, I haven't had that experience that you've had where you like kind of were led to your next thing, which was putting up the shingle and becoming a patient advocate and going into business for yourself. I've tried so many things, and just haven't found my thing, but I will continue to be patient. Okay. I guess I'll keep circling as long as the airport's still there.
Well, what's interesting about that is, and Sean and I, we've had this conversation. My first business iterations were not patient advocacy as an umbrella. I mean, I actually thought, well, I'll just build what I know, right? So I've been in geriatrics, I've been in consulting, and it was like, oh, I saw all these failure points in quality assurance and performance improvement. What if I'm just a private contractor that can help a nursing home, be better, right? Mm-hmm. And so my original business models were very much based on the known, right? You don't know what you don't know, but I was going to build something exactly what I knew. Oh, and now I'm going to have all the pressure on myself to be able to do something in a market where there's very little margin. So when I finally launched the first iteration of my business, it was travel, health, and wellness. And now I realize in hindsight that I was really toe dipping because I didn't want to fully be like the face of a brand, so to speak. I was kind of playing with something that was safe, right? Travel, health, and wellness. I traveled a lot. I'd seen a lot of things happen. What if I could help travelers travel healthier? And February 2020, my very first paid speaking gig, someone's like, look at this virus, that's like in China, should we be worried? And I was like, no, we have coronaviruses. It's virus, right? And I mean, my business never even it just screeched to a halt. And I did nothing for almost a year plus. And then my dad got sick. He passed away in grief. I did that last ditch effort to find a job, a real job, right? Because, that's what I should do. Right. And that's when that pharma position came up. And within 6 months, I was like, no, and so don't feel like it's something that you have to see it immediately. I mean, for me,
oh my God, immediately 30 years. Sister, I've given up on immediately. Yeah.
But even once you think you're in it,
yeah.
In July, when I was going, well, wait a second, why was travel so important to me? It was wait a second, it's empowering. It's not having somebody else define your abilities, right? And so that's advocacy. Oh, maybe I should offer that as a component of patient advocacy under a larger umbrella, right? And so, I think it's just, but it's also, like you said, it's learning patience with yourself, kindness, compassion, equanimity. I love to throw that word around now that I understand it. Being able to have that level-headedness, even keel. In the storm, I always think of the captain of a ship. There's a hurricane ahead, the radar's pinging, there's reefs to the left and right. Yet the person at the wheel can't be distracted by all that. They have to have a sense of knowing, a confidence, a peace, a calm.
But within yourself. Yeah.
To be able to continue to navigate.
It takes practice to hang out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good stuff. That's a really good, I think that's very helpful to people that are still out behind the bench and there is that, storm of everything, and just to kind of stay within.
Yeah.
And it really does take a lot of practice to do that, especially if you're not used to hanging out in there.
Oh gosh, the beginning, I mean, I considered it a victory if I noticed a couple of days later that I had been jerked around by my emotions.
No, that's such a great point though. That is how it starts, right?
Yeah.
You notice in hindsight, wow, I was really thrown off by what someone said or what happened. And I kind of went into a spin in my own head. And then you just, just very gently, wow, but I did the best I could that day, didn't I? And then let's see what happens the next day. That's so true. I think that happens to a lot of us. And then we silently beat ourselves up over it because that's like one more failure.
Exactly. Yeah. Nobody's keeping score except for us.
We are. Oh, we're our worst. We're so hard on ourselves, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be. We should be nicer to ourselves, I think.
Well,
that should be the big takeaway, right, Sean? Is that what you envision, the big takeaway, that we should all be kinder to ourselves?
We like action items. So
we do. Yeah, we do. We're doers, helpers and doers.
Yeah.
So that's I like it.
Yeah.
Well, good. This has been amazing, Mary and Andrea. I knew this would be just kind of like an awesome conversation. Very easy for me to moderate this one. Mary the Medicine Woman, love it. Like I said, one of the first early adopters. Like Mary and I were having Zoom calls before Zoom was a thing back in like.
We were.
Yeah. So thank you, Mary.
I'm a fan. I'm your number one fan. I'm the president of RPH Ally Fan Club.
I love that.
Is an entrepreneur and patient advocate. I'm a cheerleader. Sean's an entrepreneur running RPH Ally.
Well, this has been a pleasure, and we will. We're gonna have you on, maybe Mary, on the Burnout channel sometime or something like that. We need to like have more of these conversations. So
I think so.
And thank you, Andrew, for joining us as well. Just because this is perfect. So
it was my pleasure. I'm glad that we were able to connect. I was really excited. So yeah, thanks, Sean, for giving an intro.
Yeah.
And go Duquesne, even though I'm not from there. We got the Duquesne connection.
The Duquesne connection. Go Steelers. All right.
Oh yeah. Next year.
All right. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Peace.